Christmas is over. Christmas is over. At least that's what they think at Lowe's. I was instructed by the boss, the 4.5-year-old boss, that next year we're going to have icicle lights in our house. And so I went to Lowe's, and they had all their Christmas decorations 75% off. So I bought 45 boxes of lights, most of which were $1. But so next year, our house is going to be like the Griswolds. So everyone is wrapping up Christmas. We have told the story of the wonderful things that God has done. And this morning it felt so good to wipe clean my whiteboard, all the Advent and Christmas plans that we had. It's all done. We've opened the presents, we've sang the carols, and now it's time to leave. So, actually in the church, Christmas lasts for 12 days, as Gary said. So we actually have 7 more days. But in our world, we are moving on from Christmas. The world is moving on from Christmas. It's moving on to other things like college football. There are college footballs all over the place. I was so sorry to see Ohio State lose yesterday. Sorry, if anyone's visiting from Ohio, I'm sorry. I'm from Michigan. I don't know if Rick told you. I love Rick and Bonnie. We're moving on to New Year's plans or other things. But before we move on, as the church, let's take a few minutes for, as Paul Harvey used to say, to tell the rest of the story. We have told the story of the Savior's birth, this magical night where the angels appeared to shepherds, the virgin who gave birth, the story of the manger, the story of the stable. Now let's tell the rest of the story. In Jesus, God came to save us. And in response, what did humanity say? What did humanity say to God? Humanity said, "You aren't welcome here. You don't belong here. We don't want you." Jesus was God, the God who was never welcome. From our Christmas reading, Luke 2, verses 6 and 7, I believe you've probably heard this before. While they were there, the time had come for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in the manger because there was no place for them in the inn. No room in the inn. He was born in a stable or a barn. Some say that it was probably more like a cave because people would just put their outside things in caves. Because there was no one, not one person, who would welcome a father and a pregnant mother into their home. Think of the day Caroline was born. Being in the hospital room. Michelle was in labor all day, and we had one nurse who was with us all day. And then when it came time, it was like a NASCAR pit crew showed up. People came flying in from doors that I didn't even know were doors. I mean, it was just like, there was 12 people in there. And it was like, where did you all come from? And how'd you get here so quickly? And I'm so grateful for the care that Michelle and Caroline got. For those who made sure that they were healthy and that they were okay. I think Jesus had none of that. There was nobody who welcomed them. There was nobody who welcomed him. There was nobody who cared. There was nobody to wrap him in a blanket. There was nobody to turn him upside down and snap him. There was nobody to do any of those things. There was nobody. He came into the world just with his 2 parents. Later on, a couple shepherds, some wise men showed up, but it was just the 2 of them. There was no one there to welcome him. As a matter of fact, there was somebody in a house in front of the stable who was going on with their life and pretending like what was going on in the stable wasn't happening. There was no one there to welcome him. And then from our reading today, Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child and destroy him. Herod wanted to kill the baby Jesus. This child of very little significance in terms of the world at that time, born with nobody to welcome him, nobody to take care of him. Herod now wanted to kill him. It doesn't speak well of humanity that when God came to earth, the immediate reaction from Herod the Great, the leader of the Jewish people, was to murder him. Herod died in 4 BC, so that's why you hear that most people don't believe that Jesus was born on 0, that he was probably born around 5 BC. But where the father failed, the son succeeded. Because Herod's son, Herod Antipas, made sure that Jesus actually was killed. In verse 16, this is just tough to read. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. That was the massacre of the innocents, one of the worst stories in the Bible. We hope that it was probably just a few children, maybe a dozen or so. Certainly hope it was fewer than that. But I would imagine that, if a soldier comes to my house and says, "We're here for your daughter," they're going through me first. So it's not just children, it's parents too, and maybe even siblings. I just don't know how a parent could stand there and watch something like that happen. Just imagine that level of hatred, that level of pure ignorance, disregard for human life. You miss your shot to kill Jesus, so instead you just wipe out every kid in a town. I would certainly hope that those families and those children have a place of honor in heaven. Such a sad story. So they're in Egypt, and they're safe. And they come back a couple years later, and Jesus grows up. And he begins his ministry a couple decades later. And he starts in Mark chapter 3, and we're in the 3rd chapter of Mark. We're right at the beginning. Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. So there's a man whose hand has never been able to stretch it out, and Jesus healed him. But he did it on the Sabbath. So the Pharisees went out, verse 6, and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Chapter 3. They had designed and built a religion that suited their needs. It made them feel important. It gave them status. And Jesus' presence threatened their way of life. So they conspired to destroy him. This is the beginning of the Gospels. I'm talking Matthew 2, Luke 2, Mark 3. We often think about Jesus being crucified at the end of the Gospels, right? Typically the second to last chapter, because we have the last chapter where Jesus rises from the dead. This is at the very beginning. Just beginning his ministry, just beginning his life. Later in Mark 3, Jesus returns home where it's safe, right? Where he'll be welcomed at home. And the people who he grew up with, his friends, his family, they'll be nice to him, right? Verse 19 to 21. Then he went home, and the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him. People were saying, he's gone out of his mind. His family tried to get him to stop. They were the people who knew him best. They were the people who should understand why he's doing this, but they thought he had lost his mind and wanted to talk some sense into him. He was walking over. Verse 22, and the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, he has Beelzebub, and by the ruler of demons, he casts out demons. Imagine that. Imagine that for a moment, if you will. Imagine this. God is standing in front of you. God incarnate, God in front of you, and you think it's the devil. Imagine how upside down your world must be that if God is standing in front of you and you think it's the devil. This is scary, because I think it happens a lot. This is the story of Adam and Eve. God told them not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because you're going to get it wrong. You're going to look at good and see evil, and you're going to look at evil and see good. That's scary. Satan is this great deceiver and wants us to see what is good and call it evil. For 1,850 years, the Church of Jesus Christ approved of slavery. For 1,850 years, maybe more. In 1838, Jesuit priests sold 272 slaves to slave traders in the Deep South. to keep Georgetown University afloat in Washington, D.C. Jesuit priests sold slaves to keep Georgetown University open. The church approved of slavery for almost 2,000 years. Friends, when we see what is evil and think it is good, we are lost. We are lost. And then John 11, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. You might have heard this story before. Lazarus, the friend of Jesus, died. He came back and spoke to his sisters Mary and Martha. He weeps, and then he calls Lazarus out of the tomb, and Lazarus stands up and walks out. Many people saw this, so they went and they told the Pharisees. And so in verses 43 and 44, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Now, if you're a Pharisee, you're like a leader, right? And you just heard that this guy has the power to bring people back from the dead. What would you do? Imagine the possibilities. You'd be like, let's sign this guy up for the army. We'll never lose another war. We'll live forever. No, what do they do? Verse 53. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. You aren't welcome here. You don't belong here. We don't want you. That is the story of Jesus' life, the God who was never welcome. I wonder, how would we respond today? Jesus would certainly challenge our way of life. He'd ask us to do things that we really wouldn't want to do. He'd say things, this is the hardest part, he'd say things we would disagree with, and he really wouldn't care what we thought. He'd point out our flaws and tell us to sin no more. We would get sick of Jesus. I think we probably would all get sick of Jesus. Because the truth from our perspective is, we believe that Jesus is Lord, but we still have opinions that we want to share, some of which we know are not consistent with his. Our faith is incredibly comforting, but we know that following Jesus in no way makes our lives more comfortable. So we do what we can. We are probably unaware of how sinful we actually are, and we're okay with that. Being loved by God is wonderful, but loving our neighbors can be terrifying. From my perspective, I'm grateful for everything that Jesus did. And I'm ashamed that he was treated the way he was. But I get it. I get it. Jesus' life, from the beginning to the end, was unfair and tragic because his presence threatened people in their way of life. Because he spoke the truth and few people wanted to hear it. Or I could say, and few people want to hear it. His life was unfair and tragic, but that is exactly what he was expecting. God is not one who can be surprised. This is your first Sunday in church in a while. We're glad to see you, but God's not surprised you're here. God's glad you're here, but God does not get surprised. This is what Jesus was expecting. Jesus didn't come to be welcomed. Jesus came so that we would know that we are welcome in God's kingdom. Jesus didn't come so that he could belong here. He came so that we would know that we could belong there. He didn't come to be wanted. He came so that each of us would know that God wanted us. God wanted us. My guess is that Jesus would say the tragic thing is that there are still people who don't know the real reason why he came. Please tell them they are welcome here. Please tell them they belong here. Please tell them that I love them and I want to have a relationship with them. Don't just stop with the story of the wise men and the manger and the shepherds. Tell them that I laid down my life for a world that would not welcome me. Please tell them that it was I who saved them. Tell them the rest of the story. Amen.